Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. China is an awful place. Its human rights record is terrible. It is a monolithic state, single party. It clamps down. There's no freedom of expression, no freedom of press. And so it's no surprise, really, that the SNP admire them so much. Why else would they be willing to spend £16,000 of taxpayers' money trying to woo the Chinese delegation? And yet that is a very odd thing to do, given that the Chinese still have concentration camps, places like Auschwitz, Sobibor, Baden-Baden. You'd think they'd want to distance themselves from such a regime, especially as the people sitting in these concentration camps are Chinese Muslims. You'd think old Humza Yousaf would have a word to say on that one, but apparently not. Money talks and he don't care. And so the Chinese are over, they're being wooed, and yet they are a regime that's deemed to be an enemy state to Britain. Indeed, Chinese tech is no longer allowed to be used by the security forces or by monitoring, or even now within our telecommunications industry. They're deemed to be that much of a threat. So you have to wonder why they are so keen to open up a little pretendy embassy in Beijing. Is it just so Angus Robertson can get on a plane, fly first class, drinking his champagne and laughing at people as he goes to enjoy the delights of the Far East and all that they have to offer? Who knows? But let's take a look as to see why your money is being spent so lavishly on a regime of hate. Here goes. So, you just can't get over this one. SNP government spends £16,000 of taxpayer cash on lavish events in China to woo a hostile and regressive regime on Angus Robertson's junket. Taxpayers are coughing up £16,000 to send this ignorant oaf halfway round the world to a regime with an appalling human rights record, no freedoms, no freedom of expression, no press. He can't sit in China and say exactly what he thinks. He daren't, they'd lock him up. And yet he's going there because he wants to have this little pretendy embassy so that he can keep doing things like this on the public purse. Because, you know, it beats working for a living. And if he can spend most of his working life in the air, quaffing champagne, eating caviar in first class at the pointy end of a plane and thinking how important he is on the world stage, and it just boosts his ego, rather than doing his day job, because God forbid he does his day job. The SNP minister was previously labelled a useful idiot for heading out to Beijing, and is now being revealed that he splashed out taxpayer cash on a number of luxury events while there. So this is money over and above the cost of actually sending him to China. This is more money wanked away while they sit there and they have to cut the budget left, right and centre because they haven't got any money. No money for health, no money for education. But hey, Angus, have a great holiday, mate. Thanks. It's okay. The taxpayers are picking up the tab. You go and enjoy yourself. Have a thoroughly good time. Meanwhile, we'll just watch the children die through lack of medical care. Scottish government forked out £16,000 of cash on lavish events in China in a bid to woo a hostile and regressive regime. The money was splashed out during Angus Robertson's controversial junket to the country as he spent a week there to support Scotland's links with Beijing. Tell me, what links does Scotland have with China? Other than a few Chinese restaurants dotted around the country in Scotland and selling Chinese some Scotch whisky, I think that's about it. There's nothing else, is there? However, the true cost of the expensive trip has been kept hidden by the secretive SNP executive, as it claimed it would publish the full expenses within the next 3 months. The External Affairs Secretary was labelled a useless idiot. Useful. That's the only thing he's ever been useful at. Useless idiot. For heading to China last November due to the strained relationship between the country and the UK government. China is a hostile nation. China cannot be trusted. China is a dangerous country. It's a country that treats people as numbers, as drones. There's no freedom in China. And yet the SNP government seem determined to kiss the arse of these people with such aplomb. Look at us, look at us. Mwah! Kissing yellow arse. Simply because they are so failed within themselves. They need to go off and do things abroad to try and make themselves look fantastic. It's the first time a Scottish Government minister visited Beijing since 2019. Why are they going at all? Foreign policy is a reserved matter to Westminster. And it was hailed as a trip to improve trade and tourism links, even though that would be covered entirely by the UK government via its embassies and foreign missions. But in the last 4 years, China and the UK have clashed repeatedly over civil rights crackdown in Hong Kong and spying and espionage in the UK and China's support for Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. And there's also fears the US and China are heading inexorably towards armed conflict over Taiwan. Wasn't there something like the Dun Phuc or whatever it was called, the Lun Duke Chinese cafe in Glasgow, which turned out to be a front for the Chinese secret police? You've got Chinese secret police operating in Scotland, presumably with the full knowledge of the Scottish government. Mr. Robertson and his officials were not shy about splashing the cash in China, as he spent $16,000 just on hosting and organising lavish events. That included a $6,500 spend on alumni Scottish connections and $8,500 on a St Andrew's ball. Well, I don't want to see the other one. Smaller sums of money were spent on Cumming Botanic Garden Climate and Biodiversity Dual Crisis Summit. Now that's a title. And the Alumni and Global Scottish Connections reception. And this has been criticised by rivals. It should be criticised by everybody. This is taxpayers' cash wanked away to give Angus Robertson an ego trip. And for what? For no purpose whatsoever. And why is he sucking up to an evil regime? These communists have nothing to offer. They have cheap labour, effectively slave labour. This is why Chinese goods are so cheap. It's effectively slave labour. There's no human rights, there's no workers' rights, there's no workers' safety. You know, you're getting things come through when you hear the reports of what comes out of China. It's absolutely horrific and terrifying. People being picked up, people being executed all the time. And yet the SNP, rather than standing up and standing for human rights and standing on the right side of history, is sucking these people. It's sitting there on their knees in front of them, mouths open, ready to take what they're given, just so Angus Robertson can feel like a diplomat or whatever. He has no diplomatic standing. He's a councillor. He's a county councillor at best. He's not a national leader at all. Scottish Tory Deputy Shadow Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, long title, Alexander Stewart, said the SNP seems happy to indulge Angus Robertson's endless globe-trotting while neglecting real priorities at home. Scots struggling with a cost of living crisis and the SNP's savage tax and axe budget will wonder why their money is being spent on a jaunt to a hostile regime. Well, because Angus likes to travel. It's important to him. It gives him the fizz, doesn't it? Look at me, I'm so important. I get to travel first class all around the world as my job, so that years later I can boast about how important I am. No, Angus, you're not. You're just a prick. Anyway, Scottish Lib Dem leader Alex Cole-Hamilton, who has raised repeated concerns about the influence of China on Scotland and the UK, urged the Nationalist Minister to spell out exactly how the trip benefited the country. He said if taxpayers' money is to be spent wooing China, then Angus Robertson will need to spell out exactly what benefit came from the trip that would have not been there otherwise. Well, he got to have a good time, didn't he? That's the only benefit. Robertson, he ate well. Put it this way, nice little sleep, because you can guarantee he'd have been one of those bunks in the plane. Not for him, cattle class, not for him squeezed in a big seat, little seat with a big arse like that. No, he'd have had one of those little foldy bed things, because he's important. He said, let's not forget that the SNP government previously let a Chinese company with connections to human rights abuses and gross corruption sign a bogus £10 billion agreement with Nicola Sturgeon. And even the man who organised the deal described it as all bollocks. He says, I hope Angus Robertson also used the trip to raise incarceration of Hong Kong freedom campaigner and German journalist Jimmy Lai, the persecution of Uyghur Muslims and other human rights abuses China has been implicated in. But given the Scottish Government press released this trip without any mention of human rights or security issues, I have my doubts. And now, of course, they're wanting to build their little pretendy embassy. They'll probably want two. They'll want one in Beijing, and then they'll want one in Shanghai, because the nights out in Shanghai are supposed to be pretty good, because the whores are cheap, aren't they, Angus? coming up. You couldn't make it up. I mean, given how bad we all know China is. I mean, I was in Hong Kong. I was in Hong Kong in, 2005. And it weren't too bad then. It weren't long after the reunification, as they call it. But it wasn't too bad. We stayed on Lantau, went across onto the island and whatever. But since then, I wouldn't go back. I mean, I loved Hong Kong then, but I wouldn't go back now. It's just the clampdown that they've had. Everything has changed, and from what it was to what it is completely different. And they are oppressive. It's like the Gestapo. They've got their secret police, their political police, infiltrating everything. And we need to reject China. And China's screwed. China's absolutely screwed. All we need to do is say, right, we don't buy stuff from China. And they're finished. China only exists to export. If we don't buy, they're screwed. And they're screwed anyway. China is a failing state. They're actually pulling out of Africa now. Because the Silk Road, or whatever they called it, not Silk Road, but they had this plan, but it's all backfiring. All the property prices, all the the land estate prices and that collapsing. The whole Chinese economy is going to collapse, and they're out there. Of course, the SNP are out there. With these people with their terrible human rights record and an economy about to collapse. Sounds very much like the SNP, doesn't it? Thanks very much for watching. Do please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video, and I'll speak to you later. Bye.